All right, guys. Sorry it took a little bit longer than I was expecting to get back to you guys on a couple of things. So one question that I forgot to address in the first response video was the conflict between censoring people and freedom of speech. And in the past, I would have said this was not a huge issue. That speech should be free to the utmost limits to public safety. And we have Shank versus the United States, where we get the clear and present danger test, and then that later evolves into Brandenburg versus Ohio, which is the imminent lawless action test. And if then we had January 6th, and then we've had COVID, and we've had a lot of misinformation being circulated. Social media is really sort of a major game changer, and I don't know that we are adjusting our laws to maybe kind of deal with some of these issues, because right now, for the most part, almost completely exclusively, social media exists in private companies and private platforms, which basically, in essence, by law, freedom of speech is not protected on private platforms. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, these are private companies that kind of have the right to dictate what content's on there. But the problem is they have become how we communicate. They have become how we disseminate information, how we receive information. The younger generations are absolutely getting a lot of their news from Twitter and TikTok. So what do we do moving forward when we want to advocate for freedom of speech, but somebody has a very powerful platform and they are disseminating false information, which is leading to significant problems from a societal standpoint? That's something that we're not really accurately addressing. I don't know if we're ready to handle it. What happens when deepfakes become much more prominent and much more believable? For those of you who don't know what a deepfake is, those are videos that where basically you can, through CGI and AI, basically create a video that looks like a person saying something that they're not. The biggest problems with it now appear to be it's being most widely used in pornography. I saw a news report the other day where an influencer had, she had become a victim of somebody creating an AI generated, CGI generated pornographic video with her in it that wasn't her, but everybody thought it was her. We have seen this in the war with Russia and Ukraine, where Russia has, on at least two different attempts, created a video where Zelensky was signing a surrender declaration, or telling Ukrainians that he was going to surrender. I bring all these sort of distant examples up to kind of think about where these things are going to go. Like, is something like that, should that be protected as freedom of speech? We don't really have all the answers for this right now, and it's really hard. So, while personally, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in freedoms. Personally, am not a big fan of censorship of any kind. However, on some of these big platforms, when people are able to convince, tens of millions of Americans that the election was stolen without providing any evidence, having their court cases rejected over 60 times due to lack of evidence, there's a lot of issues here that we're not really doing a great job with. There was another question I forgot to answer about Roe v. Wade and the right to privacy. Now, right to privacy is what we call a penumbra right, meaning it is a right that is derived from other amendments, but it doesn't actually say in the Constitution that you have a right to privacy. Now, Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, and it basically guaranteed women a right to an abortion up through the first trimester, because a fetus could not live outside of the mother's body beyond the first trimester. So therefore, the state had no vested interest in protecting it. Once it becomes more viable, the state had an interest in protecting it. Was the general logic of Roe v. Wade. The Dobbs decision from last year basically kicked that back to the states. So I said this in the last video, and I'll say it again. Our institutions are only as good as the people who are in them. So when you have these switches in the court's ideology, you can get decisions that overturn it. So now it's been kicked back to the states. So, and now states are determining reproductive rights and what access to abortion will look like moving forward. Um, I saw another question about the difference between civil liberties and civil rights, and I'm pretty sure I got this in the last video, but I want to be clear about something. Civil rights are not your civil rights, which protect you on the basis of class, things like race, gender, national origin, religion, religion kind of being an interesting one there, sexual orientation. When your government acts on behalf of civil rights, they're usually acting to protect you. They're proactively acting to protect you from discrimination on the basis of those classes. Civil liberties are protections from your government. So we gave you freedom of speech, so the government could not take it away. We stated that you had protections against unlawful searches and seizures because we didn't want the government to infringe on that protection. So that's just the key difference here. I saw that on multiple questions, great questions, but this confusion about the overlap between civil liberties and civil rights, and that's just kind of a big point. Civil rights protect you; their protections provided by your government on your behalf, and they usually deal with things that you're born with: sexual orientation, race, gender, etc. But civil liberties are protections on more about speech, protection of speech, your right to exercise the religion of your choice, etc. Okay, great question about the Seneca Falls Convention and women getting arrested. One of the evolutions of society is, especially in the United States, is that when rights are undefined, like, the 15th Amendment all gave all men the right to vote, right? Well, at that point, women did not have the right to vote. Now, in some territories, just a little bit beyond the 15th Amendment, they are going to start getting the right to vote. Wyoming, out west, different states, it was ahead of the rest of the country. But by 1920, we finally passed the constitutional amendment. Now, the Supreme Court has played a role in expanding a lot of rights or ending discrimination or segregation and things like that, or defining, whether or not same-sex marriage is a constitutionally protected right. What they did, like they did in 2015. Sometimes the court, which it's the judicial branch's number one job, is to interpret the laws. And for a lot of people from the outside, it seems like they are writing law, but they don't write law, they interpret law. Now, sometimes when they interpret law, it changes laws. So in 2015, when they decided that same-sex marriage was a fundamental right, essentially, multiple states that had laws outlawing same-sex marriage had to change their laws. The Supreme Court didn't write law, but it interpreted laws that it deemed to be unconstitutional. So therefore, by deeming laws to be unconstitutional, those laws had to be changed. So it gets a little bit tricky with that. But yes, it often has to do with the political environment at hand. It says the course interprets the law. Courts interprets the law, and therefore the percentage of Congress laws to prevent rights. Okay. And one last thing I wanted to talk about. There was questions about the equal opportunity employment in the 1964 Civil Rights Act and whether or not it worked. Guys, just because we pass a law doesn't mean that it automatically everything's going to be perfect. Like the best example of that is, you've got Brown v. Board of Education in the 50s, and then you've got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bars discrimination in places of public accommodation. Voting Rights Act of 1965, and we're still fighting segregation. Does segregation apply to does segregation only apply to, state laws, state government? Does it only apply to, like, in schools or something coming down from a state government? Do private businesses have to desegregate? So we had to file lawsuits. You had to have all the sit-ins that, helped lead to judicial action that would eventually prevent those things. But it was a combination of a lot of things. And just because we pass a law, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be appropriately or equally applied across the board the way that it should. That's why, it's up to you as citizens to pay attention to who you're voting for, know who you're voting for, know what's legal, what is illegal, be informed, be educated, know our history, because it's taken on, I'm sure many of you feel like America has, a lot of problems and it's got a long way to go. And that is true in a lot of ways, but the best way to understand how to get us where we need to go is to understand what worked in the past and how to overcome our past to get to where we need to go. So I think I've answered anybody else's questions. Please feel free to reach out in the thread if I failed to answer your question this week. It's been kind of crazy at home. My wife is sick, and so it's kind of shifted some responsibilities around while she's recuperating from the flu. So hope everybody is studying for the exam. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. But other than that, I hope everybody has a great weekend, and remember to log in at Monday morning into the weekly module to see what is expected for that week. We will start Congress on Monday, and unfortunately that's depressing. So have a great weekend, guys. Talk to you later.